Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, Joe. It's been a while, but it hasn't been a while. I guess it's been a while with the audience.
It has been a while. Yeah, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. And
Yeah,
we've got a couple of topics, but if you want to post any questions or responses or anything like that, this is just sort of extemporaneous today.
yeah, it is. So for the audience, we took a kind of a bit of the summer off. So from June to now, so almost 2 months. But we kind of cheated and had a sort of a side podcast that we posted, July or something like that with Nick Schrock and Wes McKinney. So
Wes
that was
McKinney,
fun.
yeah.
But yeah, and by the way, I lost my voice too. So came back last night and I'm playing with a horrible cold. So
now everyone has it, basically, the entire plane.
I don't know. Maybe we'll find out. I think it's self-inflicted though, because it was like get back from Europe, just jet lagged, and then not sleeping well, then going off and finishing the course, and just punching it super hard. So, but it's what you got to do sometimes.
So why don't you tell everyone what you've been up to over the last several days in Mountain View?
Oh yeah. So we're in actually deep learning AI's office. It's actually it's in Palo Alto actually, which is right next to Mountain View. But so we're finishing the course number 4 for the 4-part deep learning AI course I'm doing with deep learning on data engineering. So you came down, and that was the nice little cherry on top to have you in the course. So yeah, but I've just been recording pretty much the course for the last several months. Yeah, but this is I think we're done filming, so we'll find out.
Nice.
Yep.
And so I know you posted on LinkedIn, but when is it going to be available to the public on Coursera?
First 3 courses drop on August 28th. The fourth one drops, so that's only mid-September. So
nice.
It's gonna be dope.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check it out as soon as it's available.
Yeah.
See how it turned out.
Yeah,
nice.
Let me see. Yeah, it should be a fun course. Let me see if I can put a link in the show notes here to shill our course. But what's up, everybody? It's good to see everyone.
Speaking of shilling, I want to give Lynn Bender a shout out for hosting us. We had a really nice evening on Saturday night, hosted at the Olympus. Just got to hang out with a lot of people in the area. And he actually sent us a discount code for Day-to-Day Texas. So if you haven't been to Day-to-Day Texas, check it out, but I'll drop that in the comments, and we'll also put it in the show notes later.
Yeah, shout out to Lynn for that. That was dope. So
yeah,
we had a good turnout at the the Olympus Beer Garden or something like that. So it was a lot of fun. I've actually walked by that place a few times. It's like, I wonder what this is like. And yeah, it's great.
It's like a beer garden / Turkish food joint. It's quite interesting. It was a fun place.
Yeah, which is kind of funny because I was in doing beer gardens in Germany last week or the week before, so it was kind of funny going back and seeing like Paulaner and other beer brands that you'd get in Munich. But yeah, great time. Yeah, shout out to Lynn for that. And Day-to-Day Texas is coming up end of January. I think what's the specific date on it? January 25th, I believe, or something like that. But
I think that's
around
right.
there.
Yeah.
There's a code here.
Did that come through? Yeah. It should. There's an Eventbrite link. The code is there. And basically, if you're just going to put in the code manually, it's Monday Morning Data Chat, no spaces, all caps.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, what's in your mind? What since the last time we did a Monday Morning Data Chat?
I mean, a lot of things. Some of them are not specifically to do with data, but I've been reading more about the CrowdStrike outage and specifically about the Delta Airlines part of it. And if you piece together what happened, it basically looks like the CrowdStrike update took out a bunch of machines, like a lot of Windows machines. But then the real problem was that it screwed up their crew. Basically, all the disruptions meant that their crew scheduling system had to catch up. And the crew scheduling system is like a really old IBM mainframe application. And it just couldn't do it. Like, it was just backed up for days, which is where the real disruptions happened. And so if you're following the situation, there's all this back and forth between Delta and Microsoft, Delta and CrowdStrike about who's to blame for this. Because obviously CrowdStrike triggered it. But then Microsoft is coming back and saying, well, that's true, but you were not able to recover because you have bad IT. And I think the fascinating thing to me about this is that we've been obsessing about generative AI for the last like year and a half or so. And yet behind the scenes, so much of the plumbing that runs our systems that we rely on is like this really old stuff within banks and airlines that is kind of barely still standing and works most of the time. But if there's any big disruption, it's almost like a natural disaster, right? You can cost an airline $500 million and disrupt flights for a huge number of people. And so, in some sense, like in the tech world, we're pretty out of touch with what actually goes on in most enterprises and corporations. There is a lot of really, really old stuff out there that's very hidden until it becomes a problem.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was personally affected by that outage. Not as much as other people, but I remember, my family and I show up to the airport Monday. So this was 3 days after the peak of everything, when everything just suddenly shut off. Um, like Russell has to say, generative AI versus degenerative IT. It's absolutely true.
I love
But
that coinage. That's great.
it's pretty brilliant. But I mean, there have been people at the airport who, I was walking around the Delta Lounge and it looked like a refugee camp. Like there were people who had been stuck there for like 2-3 days. Um, like one family that my kids befriended, they were on the way back from Yellowstone and got stuck in Salt Lake, and there were no airlines for flights. I think there are tickets being scalped that were like thousands of dollars to get back to their home in Atlanta, which is nuts when you consider that's not what they should cost. We had our flight, what was it, delayed a ton and then rerouted and everything. So we were trying to get to Berlin, and ended up having to go through JFK, which is horrible on a great day without a CrowdStrike and IT outage. So, but nothing compared to what some of these people had to deal with, which is again it was normal, meeting people who had been stuck for 2 days, 3 days, and Delta definitely seemed to be catching the brunt of it, just because I don't know, the other airlines seem to be doing just fine, right? So yeah, it's interesting. Aaron says Southwest Airlines plus Delta Airlines equals airline IT architect jobs. Yeah, I could see that for sure.
I mean, I think for Southwest, it was also their crew scheduling system, wasn't it? It was
Yeah,
like
it
a very
was
similar
again
problem.
creaky as well. I think there was a
Yeah.
meme going around, which I think might have been disproved, but Southwest was supposedly running on like Windows 3.1 or something, so they avoided the issue. But yeah, I think it was just fake. But it just goes to show like how I think the perception of these systems is that they're just old and creaky. But yeah, I don't know. But it's interesting just the amount of gaslighting that it's when you point out the Delta and Microsoft thing and how they're
Yeah.
going back and forth. I'm just like, it's definitely like high level gaslighting on both ends.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of New York City infrastructure in the following sense. Like you go to Manhattan, right? Okay, it's dirty, but you've got these like amazing skyscrapers and it's very modern in many respects. But then Manhattan is an island and it's basically waterlogged, and they have these pumps underground that pump the water out so that the land doesn't subside because there's so much water underneath. And the pumps, in many cases, like they've attached electric motors to them and things, but the pumps go back to like the 19th century. And this feels like a similar situation where you have this infrastructure that's kind of hidden behind modern apps and a web interface, but it's still sitting behind the scenes, kind of running the show. And if anything happens to that infrastructure, then the airline basically can't operate. Like it just takes out all these flights, and people
Mm.
can't get where they need to go. Crews can't get scheduled. Pilots can't get scheduled.
So let me ask you this: if you were Delta's CTO, what would you do?
That is a very interesting question. I mean, I think a modernization operation is definitely in order. And the problem is, the pitch I've heard is IBM is kind of pushing this notion like, oh, well, the way to modernize is to go to a cloud based mainframe. We're going to host the mainframe for you, we'll manage it. That's not really the problem, right? The real problem is the software itself. I mean, mainframe architecture, it's not modern, but it's actually plenty fast. Like they run with very fast processors and things. But the real issue is that you have this code that in some cases goes back decades, and it's kind of barely maintained and not modernized enough to deal with an emergency. And so I think for them, it needs to be a big priority to figure out how to completely replace that. Now, what exactly does that look like? I don't know enough about the details of the airline industry to figure out what that would be, but clearly their competitors are using something better that didn't go down in that situation. I mean, in the ideal world, you would maybe hire someone from Google and like build an entirely new system that's very modern and runs on microservices or some more modern paradigm where it's very, very scalable. That would cost a ton of money, and so I don't know if it's realistic. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know enough about it to really say one way or the other. I mean, I think it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback, literally.
Exactly.
But yeah, I don't know enough about it. I mean, Carl has a good point here. Like, legacy systems in question are super stable. It's the inference connectivity with the other systems that sucks. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't know if that's true, right? Ole says it sounds extremely expensive. Yeah, it
That's
does.
the problem, right?
The
Yeah.
reputational hit though that Delta
Yeah.
just took is, um, I'd say that that's pretty big. I mean, it sucks for people like us that live in a Delta hub because you don't have any other options. Like, what are you going to do? Become a American Airlines or United customer? Like, I highly doubt it. So you're
Right.
kind of stuck with them one way or the other. I mean, thankfully,
Yeah.
Delta makes up for it in other ways where I think it's a premium airline experience and they fly all the time on them. But, it's not like I'm going to jump to being a full on Frontier customer anytime soon.
Carly always makes fun of you for that, and I do too, for
Well, it's
flying
like 11
United.
bucks to fly to Denver, though. I mean, I'm not paying, so it's pretty cheap. So
It's so hard to actually hit that 11 buck number, though, right? I guess you just don't carry anything with you, even a jacket. They'd probably charge you for that.
yeah, they charge you just for breathing on that. But
Yeah.
you can do it though. Do it all the time, right? But
And
I think for
you
right.
actually don't get charged extra fees when you go.
No, I know how it works.
That's
Makes bags
amazing.
smaller than what
You
they
know how
need.
to
But
play the
yeah,
game. Yeah.
if I go to Denver or Vegas, I usually actually take Frontier just because it's the cost of a cup of coffee at an airport. So, but because otherwise Delta is significantly more money.
Oh, yeah. Like by
That's
an
when like
order
a
of
45-minute
magnitude.
flight. Like, who
Yep.
cares? So
Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, it's an interesting question. Like, I don't, if I were the CTO, I don't know what I would do. I'm curious to see after this fiasco who keeps their job. Um, so I think this is one of the situations where um, heads are going to roll at a lot of companies as a result of this. So, and I think rightfully so. This was a major screw up on a lot of ends. But again, Monday morning quarterback, right? But I would have probably no mercy on a lot of people. Is my first inclination, just because this is a very big screw up. So, like, I had some dork like in the LinkedIn comments, and I posted about CrowdStrike. Like, you should have more sympathy on people. We all make mistakes. It's like, you don't have a global outage and call that a mistake. That's a serious screw up at that point, and there should be consequences for that. So I'm generally of the opinion that things like this deserve, I would say, very swift and severe consequences. But that's how I am. So
Yeah, and just we need some way to kind of establish best practices around updates and around mission critical software. I mean, the problem is that all of our transportation infrastructure and a lot of other infrastructure is privatized, which actually works pretty well in the United States for most purposes. But if you come in as the CTO or CEO, there's not necessarily a big incentive to fix stuff like this. You look at it as like, okay, this could happen, but I'm going to focus on the stuff that is very public and visible. And if some catastrophe happens, then I'll be out of a job, but I have a golden parachute, so I could just walk away and maybe do
I'd
something
take your
else about
parachute
it.
away too,
Yeah.
because otherwise, I'm
Well,
incentivizing behavior like this where nothing gets fixed.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
you know
that's
what I mean? But that's not corporate America. I mean, that's not how it
right. You
works.
generally can't do that, right?
Yeah, but I
Just
mean,
like Dave Calhoun, his former CEO of Boeing, I think they were saying that he was going to walk away. He just got replaced, and I think he was going to walk away with like a $25 million bonus, basically,
yeah,
because that's what's written into his contract.
that's how it is, and that's why things like this keep happening because there's again no consequences. It's like Boeing like literally killed people,
Yep.
and they're a negligent corporation. I think they're among the worst corporations in the world. They used to be one of the best, but just through the Jack Welchification of Boeing and a lot of short-sighted corporate greed, which tends to manifest itself in a lot of companies, they aren't the same company anymore. I mean, they literally kill people. So, and the thing is, they paid a stupid settlement out of it too. So again, wrist
Yep.
slapping. So
Yeah,
that's just how it is.
exactly.
So
Practices haven't changed, right? That's the thing. Like the evidence we've seen says basically that their safety culture is just completely broken. Their operational culture around building airplanes, around designing them, is still completely broken after those two crashes.
yeah. Val has a good point here. We've been telling airlines for years to get moving on the modernization of systems, but they rarely do. It's a lot more expensive for them when things go wrong, but rather than investing in modernization. Yeah, so this is just a pervasive thing in IT, I think, where it's, I mean, how many companies have we seen where they're still running on creaky, 1980s era systems or earlier? Um, and it's a subpar experience for customers. It's a subpar experience for employees, but they continue using it because, um, it continues to make money. Um, and any mishaps as a result of that. But archaic architecture is, it's already baked in. right? So
Well, the problem too is that I actually there's an article. It's like in CIO magazine or something like this. I might be getting it wrong, but basically, it's an I think it's an interview with Delta CIO and talking about how they were modernizing, and it basically says, yeah, we're moving a bunch of stuff to the cloud, but we're going with a quote unquote hybrid architecture. And the hybrid architecture meant that they were actually keeping a bunch of stuff on mainframes and then adding kind of cloud layers around it. And it's it's sort of like you're a hoarder and you push everything in the garage and you hide it all for one day. That's almost what's going on. It's like the really critical parts of the systems are still running on mainframes, non-scalable architecture that can't fail over to a secondary zone or anything like that.
yeah,
And you have, the front end is kind of running in the cloud somehow, or the back end that sits above the mainframes. And so the question, yeah, like you say, is like, how do you, that's not sufficient modernization to solve these problems. You really have to get to the heart of your IT systems, the real bottlenecks that can bring down the airline to fix these problems in a serious way.
yeah, yeah. Lynn, aka LinkedIn user, says, "Imagine the cost of modernizing IMS." Yeah, exactly. Like that's reality in companies
It
still. I mean,
is.
IMS is still
Yeah.
used. So IMS is an old school database from the '60s. It's mainframe based, but still used. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, we can bitch about this all we want, but it ain't gonna get fixed. I don't think like all that's gonna happen is people are gonna sue each other. You know, get different insurance clauses or agreements, and that's about it. And this is a reality. I think you hit on this. I think pretty heavily at the beginning, where the attention's on generative AI, but as Russell points out, it's degenerative IT. That's the reality of a lot of places where, um, you're putting lipstick on a pig, right? And that's just kind of the reality of it. Like, a lot of enterprise companies. I know I have friends that have been C levels at these big enterprises who probably won't ever go back to enterprise because it's just it's again putting lipstick on a pig. It's what's the point, right? Um, but
Yeah, and it to some extent, this is something I call the early adopter problem. In other words, the reason that airlines have this problem is that they were technologically very progressive, like back in the '60s, because they're like, we can't, managing all these passengers, computers were just a miracle breakthrough. But now they have code that in some cases goes back to the '60s, and it's so old that it's very, very hard to modernize. It would require a complete re-architecture and replacement, and it would cost a lot of money. And so
mhm.
I don't know. It's almost like you need insurance companies to push for changes or the government to push for changes or something like that, or nothing is going to happen to say, you know what, the risk is too high of insuring you, or we're going to charge you a lot of money to insure you until you replace this.
Oh yeah, like the Biden mandate that uh, you know code be memory safe, right? So yeah, that's a good example of it. But we'll see
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
happens. Um, Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just I know personally and professionally, there's no way in hell I'd go work at some legacy company just because it's like,
Right.
why would I do that? Like, there's other opportunities out there. If that's where you want to work, great, more power to you. But I just figured there's this. Maybe there's pockets in these companies where you can have an impact, but for the most part, the root cause of a lot of the problems is it won't ever be addressed. So it's like whatever. Um, that's how it is. So. Yeah, and as Ole says, it comes down to this: all alternatives are more expensive. That's the reality of it. So, yeah. Happy Monday.
Yeah. Yeah. We're very optimistic. We're very optimistic about the state of the world, but I guess in many respects, this is kind of the least of our problems that we can't get from A to B. It's not great if you're stuck in an airport, though.
No, it sucks, dude. I mean, passengers are, and so are the employees. The employees are like,
Oh,
I felt,
yeah.
I felt bad for the Delta staff. I mean, they're helpless. I mean, they're having to use these. I mean, they're trying to rebook my flight, and it was just 1980s era DOS terminal. This lady was using, and I have no idea how. I was trying to decipher what she's doing. She was a whiz at it, obviously, because that's her job. But I was like, geez, um, that's how it is. And that's the tools they have. And again, a shout out to the Delta employees. I mean, they're just trying to do the best they can with the tools they have. I can't sit there and blame them. I saw a lot of passengers yelling at people, and I was like, that's not productive. I'm sure a lot of these employees just want to go home and you know cry or something. But so
Yeah, it's funny. I talked to a Delta pilot a couple of months ago, well before this happened, and he was telling me how bad the crew scheduling system is. Like all the employees hate it, and so it wasn't really surprising to hear about this happening this
well, they
month.
have no crew to schedule too, from what it sounds
Yeah,
like, because there's a huge pilot shortage as well. So that's
yeah. So that combination, like you'd barely have enough people to cover things, and then the system can't keep up with all the changes and trying to find a match, and it
yeah.
just, yeah,
Yeah, it
grinds
was
to a halt.
interesting. Like Like, I remember one time I got into a flight. This was in Salt Lake City. I was on my way to Australia. Um, we all board the plane, sitting there patiently, think we're going to take off. The flight attendant gets on and says, "Yeah, our pilot never showed up, so you're all going to have to deplane, and we need to wait 3 hours for the next pilot to show up." I was like, "What the seriously?" So I mean, that put the flight to the connecting flight at risk. But thankfully, we got it sorted out. But I was like, "How the hell does this even happen?" Right? But this is pretty normal, actually. Like I remember
Yeah.
JFK last week. It was like there's flights from Miami, going to Miami from JFK, and like they said, "Oh yeah, you're playing. It's actually it just landed at DC, so we'll wait for that to get here." I was like, "What is this place? It's just everything's just it seems super chaotic." But yeah,
Yeah. It's tough because from the efficiency perspective, and this includes like economic efficiency, but also fuel efficiency, you want to use your planes as much as possible, right? Like you want as many seats as possible filled. But then if anything gets disrupted, it's like dominoes, right? The knock-on effects. It can take days and days to recover to get everyone where they need to go.
yep. So that's airlines, a topic
Yeah, yeah,
I would
yeah.
say we're probably not experts in, but we
Monday
have to
morning
fill the day.
airline chat. Yeah.
Monday morning, yeah. It's I don't know what else is on your mind these days.
That's a good question. And what are your thoughts right now about, let's say, data engineering versus generative AI? How is the culture changing in tech? How is the economic situation changing in tech?
Where to begin? I think generative AI is an interesting one where I think people are. There's some companies that are using it. I think mainly for um, roles where it makes sense to generate a lot of text or synthesize things or summarize things. Like that's pretty dope. I think it's interesting. I from a tooling perspective, I see a lot of vendors pushing AI powered tools and so forth. You could generate code and they'll generate various parts of infrastructure and so forth. Obviously co-pilots are everywhere, both in tools and as a standalone product and so forth. So um, I think it's mixed. Some people say it's making them co-pilots are making them more efficient. I feel like um, oh, interesting comment from Val, by the way, just recycling back. Like he's worked for an airline for 13 years, never changes. So there you go. He's an expert. We're not. There you go. But yeah, so but I'm also talking to devs where I feel like maybe the current crop of generative AI tooling is causing a lot more work than it needs to, and so there's sort of a point of diminishing returns where maybe um, it's easier to do it the old fashioned way. So that's sort of what I'm observing. I know for me personally, I play with a lot of LLMs. I think they're pretty cool. I don't know that they've really changed my life that much. Um, But as far as its impact on data engineering, I still think it's TBD. If you talk to some people, they'll say that it's going to change everything, and in the next few years, engineering will change to us being orchestrators and quote managers of engineering workflows because AI will do everything. Through agentic workflows. There's other people who say that that's a pipe dream. I tend to always think that the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. Is a lot of these things. Um, People have a lot of I think vested interest as well for saying the things that they say, so that you always got to understand like where is a person coming from and when they say what they say. So that's my thoughts on it right now. I don't know, what about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same spot. I don't know. It feels like we might be exiting this hype cycle at some point soon, where there's maybe going to be a
What makes you
pullback.
say that?
It just so a variety of things. I think one of the problems is just infrastructure. NVIDIA's next gen GPU has been delayed by like what 6 months or a year, and that's disrupting the spending cycle potentially. Um, we've seen that there was a note from what was it, Sequoia, basically talking about how if you look from a cash flow perspective and the whole traditional discounted future cash flow model, it's very hard to justify the amount of investment we're seeing right now. It's also they also talk about this issue where the generational gains in these GPUs are so huge that your rate of depreciation on your infrastructure investment is absolutely massive. So in other words, you spend say $10 billion on GPUs. The next generation comes out, and effectively the value of the previous generation maybe goes down by half within a year. That's pretty brutal depreciation if you're spending that much money.
Yeah.
What else? I think just we'll see what happens with VC funding. One thing I've heard quite a bit is that at first during the hype cycle, you could show up with any demo that kind of looked like generative AI, and you would get funded, right? They would throw money at you. And now the VCs have started to get really savvy. They really dig in and say, all right, is this just another wrapper over open AI? Because if it is, we really don't care. You've got to do something more interesting if we're going to fund you. And so it just feels like maybe we're kind of getting at the peak or over the peak where the skepticism really kicks in, just like, us being slightly old. We remember the dot-com boom, and it turned out the internet was not garbage. The internet was really useful, but that funding cycle where all you had to do was show up and say, I know HTML and here's a website, and they would give you millions of dollars, that did end at some point, and it was a pretty big crash of the NASDAQ and a VC funding, and it feels like we might be getting close to that point. I don't know.
Might be. Yeah. I mean, FMI has a good point here. I'd agree. Generative AI could help companies migrate from legacy systems, not perfectly yet, but
Yeah.
a lot more cost effective. Yeah. So, I mean, I think IBM's actually doing this right now where they're using generative AI to help with COBOL code and whatnot.
Yeah.
Wall Street Journal had an article on that. And that's, I think, a good use of it where, um, you have a lot of institutional knowledge or retired knowledge at this point. So I think that's a good use of it. But yeah, I think it is interesting. I mean, for the most part, I mean, I talk to a lot of companies every day, or used to. I try not to as much anymore because I felt a lot of them were very samey, right? Where, the generative AI stuff was, um, now you can chat with your data. Like I don't take calls from companies that talk about that anymore. I don't think that's very interesting because it's like every company's doing that, right? Texas SQL and all this stuff is, I think, just, I don't know. I don't think it's that interesting of a problem anymore because it's, as I said earlier in another podcast, I think it's now the equivalent of a pie chart. There's no differentiation, right? Like if pie charts were a new thing, um, the pie chart hype cycle, well, every company would include that in their BI workflow, and that's just, to me, LLMs are no different. And so at that point, it literally is, um, just this it's an expectation. But let me ask you this though: in most tools now, they have the little sparkly star with a wand that indicates there's some AI functionality there. How often do you use them?
I really don't use those things very much. I mean, I do just like you, I use LLMs in a more general way, but the integrations I don't tend to touch that much. I guess I've just become very skeptical of them. Sort of like voice apps, right? Really cool a few years ago. I personally don't use them a whole lot. I find them just kind of annoying. I know some people do. What I think too, I wonder if we are heading into the trough of disillusionment. Maybe this is just my disillusionment, but I frequently, like using Google search, see answers out of the AI assistant that are just complete junk. And it's not even necessarily a traditional hallucination. It's more like it will summarize some information correctly, but it misses the main point of the question you ask it. It will leave out a really important piece of information that actually is the thing that you're after. That's the most important thing that you should understand. It's like if you have an employee and you ask them the status report on some project and they go through 50 different details, but then the last thing they say is, and the project is it's 6 months behind and we're 2 times over budget. Like, well, why didn't you just lead with that? That's what I care about. And frequently the Gen AI answers look like that. It's like they're RAG supported, presumably, but they give me a bunch of details and they leave out like the most important thing.
Mm.
Is that your experience, or do you have a different?
I think it depends on the tool.
Yeah.
Like I use Asana for all my my task management,
Yeah.
right? And they have this generative AI feature, which I'm sure might be useful for some people. But it's like, okay, summarize your tickets, and I'm like, well, I don't know, do I need that? Maybe if I'm working on a big team, I need to find tickets, but I think a search bar could do the same thing. So so I think the generative AI stuff is, I think, useful for synthesizing and summarizing, right, which are sort of the opposite ends of the spectrum. You're either creating new data or you're summarizing large amounts of data. I think it's awesome for summarizing large amounts of data, actually. You know, um, I know in certain workflows I'm using for my book in terms of editing and bouncing ideas off things. I think is actually really good. It's like having you know uh, a friend that's probably read millions of books supposedly, or at least can BS their way through it. Um, but it's got a lot of context that you probably don't, right? So I look at it that way. But I think there's definitely a lot of companies smacking this stuff on their products because they have to. I mean, we're talking to a pretty prominent tech practitioner and thought leader at the happy hour over the weekend, Mountain View, and this person was saying their investors were asking, "What's your AI story? Why aren't you putting AI in your product?" Right? And this person's like, "Because it doesn't make sense." It's like, okay. So I think that's a good honest pushback to something where it's like this, this person, and then this person has a ton of credibility in the space, tons. Not going to name names, but it's like, that person also knew that like this wasn't a fit, right? Or you can get by just using good old PG vector, and get a lot of the way there without having to spend a bunch of money on very sophisticated tooling. So it is interesting. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny because we went through right before the Gen AI hype cycle, we went through this modern data stack data hype cycle, and that kind of went up and then started to deflate. But the truth is that you can still do pretty well as a startup by just providing traditional enterprise functionality, right? Like data transfer, getting data out of databases, just like the old mainframes we talked about. These basic things are still hard for enterprises, and there's still problems that they need to solve.
Yep. Yeah. But a lot of this seems like I think unlike the dot-com bubble or the boom and bust, where that was, I think, very consumer led, and people were rushing to, because there's a new way of communicating. You got to remember. I mean, I was around before the internet and definitely on it and made websites and was a webmaster and all that stuff, right? And it was there from the very beginning. And it feels like this is a bit different, where it feels like it's a lot of vendors cramming this down people's throats, right? Because my big question is, who's asking for this stuff?
Yeah, because I feel like there is that magical experience, and it's still kind of magical, even though we've had it with us for a while, right? Basically a year and a half at this point, of interacting with ChatGPT, asking a question, seeing it speak multiple languages, translate languages, all these different things. But the product side of integration still seems to be lacking and probably isn't something that most people are asking for. For example, are people asking for the Google AI assistant, or is Google just doing that to play catch up to say, hey, we're going to
It
keep
feels
up?
very much like the latter, to be
Yeah.
frank,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's why they did it. They rushed it out, but it wasn't like customers were clamoring saying, "We really need this in our lives, like today, or we're going to switch to ChatGPT," right? But it's a perception that if you're not doing it, then you're, sort of a has been,
Yeah.
you
And
know.
just terror of losing market share, right? Like that is the court recently ruled that they have a search monopoly, basically.
Mhm.
Google is very dominant in the search space. It makes a lot of money there, and so obviously they do not want to lose even say 10% of that share. It would be devastating to the company.
Well, it would be. They print money. It's a great business model. Um, so yeah, and I think the questions of, whether we're heading into trough of disillusionment or peak of inflated expectations, to borrow Gartner's hype cycle. I don't know. Does it really matter at the end of the day though? I mean, at some point, like this does, people, it's hot, then it's not. That's like every technology fad, right? So, but then it ends up having, the slope of enlightenment, and then people figure out, actual use cases for this stuff. I mean, there's actual use
Right.
cases for it. Like I said, I use it every day. So at least there's a sample size of one where it finds it useful, but you know, they, I'm not saying it's a fit for every workflow. And the thing that really irritates me is this conflation that if we just throw generative AI at every problem, we can reduce our workforce, right? We can achieve productivity gains in our business, and and Klarna was an early example of this. But you start digging under the hood of Klarna's announcement of like achieving huge productivity with its customer service thing, and it was all a bunch of BS. So it's a nice press release, but it didn't have a lot of substance.
Well, again, on another show one time, I said that at some point we would see a hedge fund blow up due to machine learning or AI or something like this. We've arguably seen other businesses like Zillow kind of blow up in that way, right? Like
Well,
these
I mean, look at the
models.
first one that blew up because of an algorithm is long-term capital management,
Yep. Yep.
arguably, right?
Black Scholes.
It
Yeah.
wasn't an AI formula, but it was an algorithm that they trusted a bit too deeply.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll see those things. We'll see things like that blowing up. I mean, I imagine we'll just see businesses do a lot of damage to their business and customer relationships just by misusing tools at some point.
Yeah, yeah. It's yeah. I don't know. So if we were to bet some money, what do you think's going to happen next year?
Uh,
50 bucks,
I
let's say.
Up $50. I think within the next year, it's likely that the bubble deflates somewhat. Now, how catastrophically does it deflate? That's the question. Is it deflate like the dot-com bubble, or is it a more gentle kind of a slowdown in the spending in the domain? That I'm not sure. How about you? What
Mm.
do you think?
I don't think it's anything like what .com was. I think a lot of the layoffs that you're seeing, for example, right? And a lot, I mean, that's just expediency. You can blame people, companies like to blame AI on it, like, oh, we're, um, but yeah, I think that this, it's a matter of getting traction, right? And so if people are actually using this stuff and finding fulfilling use cases in their lives, and then it gets traction. But if it doesn't, then yeah, it kind of goes away. But let me see what
Yeah,
was
it's
the latest
funny.
layoffs here.
Well, I mean, a lot of the layoffs we're seeing now, I would argue we haven't called it this, but in some sense, it's not a hype cycle, but there was a kind of a COVID tech cycle, right? Like everyone was at home watching Netflix and everyone was ordering through Uber Eats and everyone was using all these apps, which drove a lot of spending and a lot of hiring. And so, of course, there was going to be a hangover when people started going back to work and couldn't watch TV for 5 hours a day. And so canceled their Netflix subscriptions.
Yeah,
And I think part of it, the same thing in data, right? There was a lot of interest in just collecting data because the demographics of your user base would just shift completely overnight in 2020 because everyone was suddenly at home. And so they're not using applications through work as much anymore at the office. Everything is happening at home. Their behaviors are different. You want data to understand how those changes are happening. And then once they go back to work, it's like, all right, we can cut back on that spending. Our profits are down. We need to make some adjustments.
yeah. But I'm looking at like, okay, so Intuit laid off a bunch of people because of AI restructuring. Dell, announced massive layoffs between 10 and 20,000 people just like last week, also because of quote AI restructuring, right? And so, um, I don't know. I mean, I know it's a grapevine, some of the AI initiatives at these companies, which I'm not going to talk about, but I feel like it seems a bit misplaced. But it's a nice excuse for sure, because you can say, well, AI, because it gives you the double whammy of like a double benefit of having a PR press release that says AI, and we're also cost cutting, so we're saving money, so win-win. Um, so
But
that's what we're
you
doing.
wonder if they're actually saving money or if they're just cutting employees because they've spent a ton of money on these initiatives,
I
right?
think it's the latter, and I think
Yeah,
they
yeah.
just overhired to begin with, and that's you have a lot of dead wood you got to get rid of. That's kind of how it is. So but if you, it's interesting because I mean I haven't seen like this corresponding productivity gain because of quote AI, right? I mean I think we talk to enough companies and we know kind of what's going on in a lot of places. Like I just don't see it.
Yeah, I
So
mean, is code translation or code generation kind of the killer app? I don't know. I have friends going back to what you were saying about code translation earlier, translating out of COBOL. I have friends who work at banks and who are using ChatGPT and other tools to translate between like Java and Python in terms so to kind of remap their code base. And they
okay, well
have said, yeah,
let
go
me
ahead.
ask you this then: if that was the case, you'd see these modernization efforts we were talking about earlier, happening at a very fast rate because like I'm guessing you would, right? Because it's like code generation allow you to get off these creaky mainframe systems onto something at a fairly low cost because that's how that would work. But are we seeing that?
And maybe that's the issue, right? Maybe that was just the hype cycle. Maybe we were like just getting so excited about the technology, and then it turns out that the code is not very good when we start testing it or something, and we're backing off. I'm not sure. We've kind
Well,
of seen, yeah. Go ahead.
well, I mean, what I notice though when I go to I speak at tech conferences and quote AI conferences is that there's a lot of, I would say, misinterpretation about what generative AI is supposed to do, right? I think because a lot of these, if you listen to a lot of pundits on stage, they're like, "Oh, AI is going to transform the companies, and um, we'll we can do everything with like no employees," and a lot of these crazy ass claims, right? Like because ChatGPT's here, there's like this. I've listened to talks, I've sat in the audience of these places where it's like the the singularity is just around the corner. We're gonna have AGI because of ChatGPT, and obviously when this happens, companies will see untold efficiency gains and so forth. And I'm like, cool. Show me where it's happening, right? Because this is all chatbots. This isn't because I think what's missing from the broader context is all the other machine learning, right? That's been around for ages. The stuff that's actually providing value and stuff at most companies, right? So if you're needing
Yeah.
e-commerce company, recommendation engines have been around for ages. Like that makes a lot of money. I was talking to one guy about a friend of his, and he was going through Amazon's um, you know P&L, and they said that like 32% of revenue came from recommendations or something like that. Don't quote me on the number, but it was like multiply that by the amount of revenue they make, and that's adding a lot of value right there. You can tweak that thing all day and make money, right? That's awesome. So
Well, and going back to what you were saying about code translation, I think part of the issue with trying to translate these COBOL applications into more modern languages is that it's probably actually not what's needed. In practice, what's needed is like a complete rethink of the software architecture, because this software architecture was just designed for a very different time. It's never going to be it's scalable enough to deal with day-to-day problems, right? Like day-to-day, you're at a bank, it can handle day-to-day transactions, but it's not scalable enough to deal with load spikes that can be caused by, I don't know, a lot of people looking at their phones and checking their bank balances, or a lot of people trying to change their flights all at once. And so Gen AI, maybe it can translate, just kind of directly between COBOL and Java, but you really need a great application architect to go in and start dismantling this old system and even completely
yeah,
rethinking the data structures, the algorithms it uses, and kind of rethinking the whole system in a modern architecture perspective. Because we've seen ultra scalable architectures. They're very standard in the tech industry. Look at Uber. Yeah, maybe way too many microservices, but they generally don't have trouble with scale, and they're operating at just like far higher scale than an airline.
mm-hmm. Yep. But yeah, it's interesting. Evo's got some good points here. But just the cost of getting up to speed and stuff here, right?
We
But
might have to have him on the show sometime to talk about this stuff.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So I don't know, but like I said, I think there's some good gains, especially when you're talking about things like film production stuff, right? Like if you talk to
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of people in film, which I was talking to the film crew, filming my course and stuff, and they're definitely concerns about that. But that's again generative AI. It's like you're able to generate movies and characters and so forth. I think that's that applications like that are awesome, and that's real. But when you're talking about legacy systems, I just think we're trying to apply stuff, kind of willy nilly, sort of a blunt force tool, and um, but for video and image and kind of random SEO copywriting, for example, is just a few examples. Like it's awesome at what it does.
It
And
is, but I think I'll have to find the article. I think it was the New York Times. They were basically talking about how copywriters just saw their business dry up after ChatGPT dropped.
yeah, Upwork
And
postings were down like
yeah,
25% or something. Yeah,
but then 6 months later, they saw a spike that actually exceeded what they were getting before, because businesses are like, yeah, the copy is not very good. And so now we actually need to go back and redo a bunch of stuff. So now we have a backlog of things that
I think if
need
you
to be
cared
done.
to do that, you could,
Yeah.
you want to edit it. But I know a lot of people who do SEO that don't care. Like they're just trying to get the rankings, and I think the term for it is slop, right? And so
Yeah.
in that case, it's like whatever, right? Or you have certain politicians claiming that crowd sizes are all AI generated in some photos now. So you know,
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's we're going to see a new era. I hesitate to use the word, but the word, the ification of the internet, right? That we're going to see just a new level of that with Gen AI. Yes, you'll see some high quality content that comes out of Gen AI, but you're just going to see a flood of junk that's just designed for SEO or just designed to temporarily grab eyeballs for 30 seconds.
yeah, yeah. I mean, um, that's why I'm doing certain things I'm doing, which I think that there's going to be a need for more high quality content
I agree. I
in the
agree.
future. And by that I mean like real high quality content. So curation, is going to be something that's going to be hard to do. And um, what else? I also feel like the things with high friction are going to be more in demand. So in person, for example, like that's another one where that's. I think people are going to want to escape this sort of hall of mirrors, kind of world that you've described. Um, So it's yeah, but I'm curious to see what it does to the podcasting, for example, too, where are you just gonna have like AI generated podcast hosts? I mean, you probably already have them, but but then you have a lot. There's AI generated influencers on Instagram and TikTok that have millions of followers too. So but I think it's the creative worlds and all that stuff is where it's going to be impacted first, precisely because it's I wouldn't say it's the best, but it does a decent enough job at generating things, and most people are none the wiser. I mean, so or
And
don't
it's more
care.
targeted. That's the big thing, right? Like the content can be directed almost specifically at a small cohort of users or one user even, rather than
Mhm.
like we just say random stuff on here and if people want to show up, they show up.
Yeah, that's just it. I've been thinking about that in the context of education as well, and I think that the cool thing with these kinds of tools is that I think the amount of personalized content that you can create to help people learn. That's something I'm very interested in exploring. Just I think that's so it could I think as much as we take a giant dump on generative AI when it comes to business applications. I'm sure there's quite a few, but when it comes to other use cases, I'm actually quite bullish on it. So
Oh, long term, I'm absolutely bullish. I think maybe we've already found the killer apps. We'll find other killer apps that will really be a driver here. But yeah, I think the tendency to just try to drop Gen AI into any product, into anything without a lot of thought, without a lot of engineering or customization, that's going to come to an end at some point.
yeah, again, because it felt
It
like it was
has
very
to.
forced, right?
Yeah.
Because we got out of this. I mean, you got to understand the macro environment too, right? What happened was you came out of COVID, and VCs, a lot of their investments are underwater,
Yeah.
right? So I think like 60% of unicorns I was reading are probably going to be sold for 30 cents on the dollar. You know, nowhere near being unicorn status. The ones that were minted, especially back in the COVID days, and so you have to have a new story to pump up the valuations of these companies. But the thing is, with everyone's doing that, there's not really a compelling story, and so this is kind of the world you're in right now. Where if everyone's an AI company, then what's special about that, right? And so you think because if that were the case, if the stuff's been around for at least in public imagination for 2 years, and obviously a lot more. But if it was, I think having a substantial impact on valuations, you would see a lot of companies not be so underwater. But that's not the case. The numbers are the numbers.
Yeah, it's interesting because did you probably heard about the acquisition of character.ai?
Yep.
And basically it was just an acquihire. Like there was no interest in the underlying product. It was
It was kind of
just
a rent to own thing, actually, too. Like
yeah,
they sort of
yeah.
like leased them back because they left Google, started Character, then came back on a
Yes.
contract basis. So, um, yeah, if you want to make a lot of money, quit work at big tech and then quit your job and start an AI company, then come back. So,
Get resold back to
um,
back to your employer. Yeah, they can
yeah,
acquihire you back at a much higher price, basically.
yeah. But and I think that for people like that, obviously they seem like pretty smart people. So, the Character was doing some pretty cool stuff. There's another company, Synthesia, which it was pretty cool, just making avatars and stuff. And I thought that was pretty awesome. I mean, we were actually chatting with a very prominent person in the machine learning field about a bot that this person was working on, and I thought that was pretty cool. But um, I mean, it's happening, and but I don't know. But it's easy for us to sit here and sound grumpy, I guess, right? And I think it's. But I've also learned not to be overly cynical about things. I mean, for everything that happens, including stuff like blockchain, there's always some underlying thing that comes out of it. I've yet to see something with blockchain actually, but with other technologies, there's good that comes out. I mean, I remember people saying the internet was going to be a fad back when the web was new. It's like, who's going to want to do that? That's stupid, right? But here we are.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. I mean, in a sense, back in the late 90s, the internet was a fad, right? Everyone jumped on board and then the crash happened, but then it slowly started coming back up. And again, to cite Google is one of my go-to examples, but like first time I saw Google was probably 2001, and it was just that was like kind of the first big application that I think of from the post uh, implosion of .com that ended up being really durable, and then Amazon that I guess came out before and then grew significantly afterward. But
mhm.
yeah, it was like a slow. It imploded, and then it turned out it didn't really go away. You just kept using it, and then it got bigger and bigger and
We got rid
bigger.
of all the cruft, is what happened.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yep.
But I think that's that's how every technology boom and bust cycle is. And like I said, I think that was there was a lot of overinvestment in that. Obviously, I mean, I was around for the dot-com boom and bust, and it was. I don't see that happening with the AI thing. I don't think there's as much. I don't think there's as much at stake here, right? Because technology itself is firmly embedded in people's workflows. So this to me is just like it's a nice feature, which has some utility greater than others and other use cases. But so we'll see.
Yeah, we will. And it makes me speculate, and I actually have no idea what the answer is, but what we've seen is just one tech wave, one tech hype cycle after another, right? I mean, we saw the data science boom, ML boom, we saw the modern data stack boom, now Gen AI. And so that raised the question for me, okay, if this bubble deflates a bit, what comes next?
Whatever's going to get a lot of money.
That's exactly
right. That's literally the definition of it. But I don't know what that is, right? I think this still has a bit of ways to go. And so yeah, I don't know. That's why my comment earlier about whether we're at the the trough of disillusionment or the peak of expectations, somewhere in between. I think it's sort of an irrelevant discussion in a lot of ways. Because there's utility, it's there. There's also a lot of companies that are over indexing on it for all the wrong reasons, and that's how it is. But there's a ton of AI washing, but you can replace AI with modern data stack washing and so forth, and that you get to the same conclusion. It's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine last week. Back, what was it, 2020, 2021. I mean, you saw like a huge influx of investment into, say, ML ops, for example, right? And AI, ML observability and data observability and so forth. I mean, how many friends we have had data observability companies?
quite a few. Yeah.
I think like all of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Everyone, if you don't have a data observability company.
Yeah. I mean, I was like, do we start one too, just to fit in? But suddenly it's a very crowded space. You're competing for limited budget right now, right? Especially as companies are cutting back on SaaS spend and laying people off. That means less people that need to use these tools, which is sort of creates its own spiral. So that's sort of what happens on the downslope of these things. But does that mean observability is a fad and didn't need to happen? Of course not, right? You didn't need to observe things, and there's a lot of utility in it. It just happens to be really crowded, where every person and their brother was getting, actually in some cases literally in that case, getting funding. But that's how it is. So
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny, but when the deflation happens, that's when products start to mature. Yes, a lot of products,
yeah.
some companies will go out of business, some get acquired. But the companies that stick around, or sometimes when they get acquired, they start to mature and build really good products. Like often the initial startup product is basic, it can do a few things, and then it just takes it's a long slog to build something that's really, really useful across a broad spectrum of companies.
Yeah, and as Eva points out, the AI washing is unfortunately necessary. I do actually disagree with this. The cost of not doing it is higher. There's sort of a prisoner's dilemma where if you don't do it, you know, you end up looking stupid. I do disagree with him though that it's necessary. Um, I don't think it's necessary. So I think in a lot of cases you end up looking um, kind of
Foolish,
dumb,
potentially.
actually. Yeah. So I
Interesting.
think it is unfortunately the consequence if you lay out the game theory of it. But
Yeah.
is it necessary to do? I actually don't think it is. So it depends if you have a use case for it or not, right? But I think customers can see through it pretty quick. So
Yeah, you have to figure out how to give them something actually useful, even if it's very basic. And so, like, instead of promising we're going to do everything completely automated and you won't need humans anymore, just give them one function that they're actually going to use on a
that's just
day-to-day
it.
basis. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I asked my old billionaire boss, how do you make a lot of money? The answer is very simple. It's like you make a lot of money by selling things that people want to buy.
Yeah. And see, tech has kind of inverted that cycle. And you can, I mean, this goes back to the late 90s and to Google and Amazon, where the cycle is always about getting a lot of users. And then you kind of figure out how you're going to make money off of them. But sometimes we never get to that latter part of actually giving them something useful and making money off of it. We just build the user base and then the company collapses.
Yeah, or people end up not wanting it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you see this a lot in social networks.
Right. Right.
But
They actually rebel against it. They treat it as an addictive product. It turns out that it is addictive, but it's also undesirable. Like,
but that's Mark Zuckerberg's stroke of genius too, is he
yeah,
provides you a lot of other options, right? So you don't want to go to Facebook because it's full of a bunch of unhinged boomers. Then go
yeah,
to
yeah.
Instagram, go to WhatsApp, right? And so I think that that dude just has like a sixth sense in terms of what the taste of people for social, right? Where it's just
Except for the metaverse, at least so far. But
the
maybe
metaverse
that's
so
going to be the
far.
next
I've been tempted to
cycle.
get the Oculus 3 though. It looks pretty
Yeah.
cool. Yeah. We do have an Oculus 2, which is kind of fun to use. But yeah, I mean, it's like you get on there and it's not a social network by any means. It's like you're on there playing with yourself. That's not kind of bad. But um,
So someone on my flight back from San Jose was wearing a Vision Pro the whole time. So maybe it's finally taking off. I don't know.
actually, okay. Yesterday I was walking. Okay, that's funny. That's total tech bro thing. I was walking around downtown Palo Alto yesterday, and there was a robot and a. Let me see if I can find the video. It was hilarious. There's a robot in a chair driving around talking to people. Um, this thing.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, but then I walk by a coffee shop and I see a guy wearing an Oculus with a laptop in front, and he was the one controlling it. It's like it's because I was looking at him. He's moving his head
Oh.
as this thing was moving.
So what he's talking
Um,
to people through this like virtual avatar, but it's actually
yeah,
physical avatar. Okay.
yeah. Thought that was pretty interesting. It was like this. It was very fitting for the place. So, um,
It's very interesting because it feels, at least Mountain View feels like kind of dead suburbia in some ways. And yet there's all this tech money around and all these companies in that area.
oh yeah, it's a lot, but yeah, I think I don't know. Spend more time there. Actually, I don't know. It's cool because I feel like the Bay Area. I mean, it's only an hour or 20-minute flight for us, but I like it just because everyone's there. So it's um, sort of the epicenter of what's going on, whether you like it or not. It's like just everyone's there. So I think you go there or live there because of the proximity to everything that's going on. There's no other place like it in the world. So it's cool, but I don't know. Well, awesome. Anything else you want to rant about?
I think that's probably enough ranting for one day. We've got to get some other people back on here to rant. So
Yeah, we got
we'll
some guests coming up here. I need to actually go back and remind them they're supposed to show up for the show.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think we have they're gonna switch up the format a bit. We're gonna have some co-hosts coming in and some new co-hosts coming in and helping out once in a while. I know that my travel schedule this fall is gonna be kind of nuts, so I may or may not be able to be around, and so I want to hopefully give Matt some assist. Let's spice it up a bit too. I mean, you've been having to deal with Matt and I for years now.
Yeah. You need some new people in the mix for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, not a bunch of unhinged boomers, as we said earlier.
Unhinged Gen X. Thank you very much.
Gen X, yeah, we are Gen X. We're not boomers, yeah. But no, it's good to be back on the show. I felt like, it's funny because I wake up Monday mornings and be like, yeah, what are we gonna do? And it kind of felt like there's a void missing. So now it's at least something here. It's became I think when you do something for years, it becomes part of your kind of mental clockwork. So
Yeah, it's just part of the experience. But yeah, I think we're going to have a great slate of guests coming up, and like you said, some co-hosts. So this should be a lot of fun.
yeah, and if the audience has any things they want us to talk about or topics they're interested in, feel free to message myself or Matt on LinkedIn messages or email or text if you happen to know how to get a hold of us, and we're happy to figure out if that's a topic worth pursuing or not. So I think
Yeah.
the problem with Matt and I is we get caught in our own filter bubble.
Oh,
So
definitely.
if one of
Yeah.
us misses something, the other one's going to miss it too, right? And so I think there's enough interesting stuff happening where let's spice it up a bit. But yeah, thanks to everybody who I guess hung out and tolerated us for the last hour. So
Yeah, usually you have the guests to temper us a bit. We let them talk mostly.
this is actually why we have guests. So otherwise you get this kind of stuff, which I don't know, ain't that bad. Anything you want to announce or talk about that you're stoked on coming up, Matt? Or
I think that's it for the moment. So there's going to be an O'Reilly super stream in October about learning data engineering. So I'll have more to say about that soon. We're finalizing the speaker list for that, but we should have about 7 speakers or so. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, I will not be at the O'Reilly Super Stream, but I will, I guess next month be at Big Data London giving a talk there. And that kind of kicks off a tour. So after that, going to Data Eng Bites in Australia and New Zealand. I think more immediately, the data engineering course on Coursera comes out, like we're saying, end of August. So expect to see a lot of spam and promotion on that. But pretty stoked on that course. I think there's, this thing's just a different level of production and course than I've seen. So I'm really excited about that. So that's been primarily my focus. I've had to actually take a bit of time off. I wouldn't say time off from the book, but definitely this course has been the focus for, I'd say the last month, just because there's a lot at stake and it has to be really good. There's a lot of investment and a lot of, I think a lot of people are eager to take it. So that's been my primary focus. So now that, about wrapped up, back to the book. That should be out sometime this fall, I hope. So, but you can go check that out over at practicaldatamodeling.substack.com to get early drafts and discussions. And by the way, forgot to announce, we also do these data therapy sessions. And so I think the first one, or the one we're going to be doing, is tomorrow morning, actually. So I'm going to alternate mornings and evenings every week. To give people from different time zones a chance to show up. But data therapy is pretty cool. You can show up and talk about your problems in a supportive group. We don't record it. You can stay anonymous if you want, but the whole point is to let you know that you're not alone in this world. You're not crazy. There are people who are going through the same things you are with data and tech. So if that interests you, go to practicaldatamodeling.substack.com, go to the chat there, and we'll post the times and the invite there. So, but been a very, very good group of people, and super excited about that. But yeah, other than that, my newsletter will be back in force this week. I had to take the last 3 weeks off because this course has been taking up a lot of time, but enjoy it, also traveling, I guess. So, but yeah, that's about it. But yeah, we'll see you next week, and take care, everybody.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon. It was fun. Thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you.